I hadn't meant to stop at the flea market that Saturday. The morning had been cold, my errands dull, and the only reason I wandered down the road stalls was the smell of roasted chestnuts curling through the air. But then, halfway between a vendor selling chipped teacups and another hawking postcards from places no one remembered, I saw it. The mirror. It leaned casually against a stack of furniture, as though it were just another piece of someone else's forgotten life. Yet it seemed to pulse, to catch the light even when the sky was dull. The frame was carved from dark wood, vines twisting around its edges in delicate loops like ivy captured mid-climb. Dust smudged the glass, but beneath the haze was something magnetic. A pull that made me step closer before I realized my feet had moved. "Beautiful, isn't it?" the vendor said, a man in a wool coat 2 sizes too large. He grinned, though the grin didn't reach his eyes. "Came from an old house uptown. Belonged to a woman who never liked photographs. This mirror was all she used." I touched the edge of the frame. The wood was cool, smooth where time had worn away sharpness. "Does it work?" I asked, immediately regretting how ridiculous the question sounded. He laughed. "The sound's sharp. It shows what's there, doesn't it? That's all a mirror can do." But the way he said it made my skin prickle. I told myself it was impractical. I had no space in my apartment, no need for a mirror taller than me. Yet I heard myself bargaining anyway, my voice steady even as my chest tightened. Minutes later, I was carrying it home, the vendor's grin following me down the street like a shadow. By the time I maneuvered it into my apartment, the afternoon light had already begun to fade. I wiped the glass with an old cloth, the dust lifting away in streaks, until my own reflection stared back. My face looked ordinary enough. Tired eyes, hair tucked into a messy knot, a smudge of lipstick worn off hours ago. Normal. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the reflection lingered a fraction too long after I had moved, as if the glass were reluctant to let me go. I propped the mirror against the wall near my bedroom, telling myself it was temporary, that I'd decide later where it belonged. But that night, brushing my teeth, I caught sight of it through the doorway. The glass seemed brighter than it should have been in the dim apartment, catching light that wasn't there. I turned off the bathroom light and stepped into the hall. My reflection waited. Still me, still ordinary. Yet when I leaned closer, the air felt cooler, denser, as if the glass held a breath it hadn't released. I shook my head, laughing softly at my own nerves. "It's just an object," I told myself, "just wood and glass." But as I turned away, something shifted in the corner of my eye. My reflection, my own face, seemed to hold the faintest curl of a smile. And I knew, with sudden certainty, that the vendor had lied. This mirror would show me far more than what's there.
The first morning with the mirror, I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. The glass stood quietly in the corner of my bedroom, catching the pale light that crept in through the blinds. My reflection looked the same as always, hair messy from sleep, eyes puffy, sweatshirt hanging too loose on my shoulders. I sighed, reaching for the mug of coffee on the dresser, and when I glanced back, I froze. My reflection was still staring at me, but the mug wasn't in her hand. I blinked hard, then looked again. She was empty-handed, her fingers curled as if they gripped invisible air. I lifted the mug, took a deliberate sip, and watched. My reflection didn't move. She only tilted her head slightly, as though studying me from the other side of glass. The heat drained from my coffee. My chest prickled with cold. Then, in the space of a heartbeat, the reflection shifted, mug suddenly in hand, eyes mirroring mine as though nothing had happened. I laughed shakily, though the sound rang hollow in the room. Too much caffeine, I whispered, forcing myself to turn away. But the unease clung to me. Later that day, I dressed for work and paused in front of the mirror. My blouse hung straight, buttons aligned, hair pinned back neatly. Normal. Yet something about the reflection felt fuller, like it carried weight I didn't see in myself. I leaned closer, narrowing my eyes. My reflection smiled back. I hadn't smiled. My lips were still pressed together, unsmiling, uncertain. But in the glass, my face tilted upward with a softness I hadn't felt in weeks. My breath caught. I touched my cheek, half expecting to feel the pull of that grin. But there was nothing. Only me, stone still, staring at a version of myself that looked lighter, freer. The smile faded as soon as I acknowledged it. The glass returned to obedience, echoing every move from then on. I was late leaving for work because I couldn't stop testing it. Raising an eyebrow, turning my head quickly, clapping my hands together. Each time the reflection lagged just enough, like a person answering questions half a beat too slow. By the time I finally shut off the light and stepped out, my skin hummed with unease. That evening, as I returned home, I caught myself hesitating outside my own bedroom door. It was ridiculous. Afraid of a mirror, afraid of myself. But when I pushed the door open, the last rays of sun slanted across the glass, and I thought I saw movement behind me. The room was empty. Yet in the mirror, a shadow lingered long and thin, stretching past my shoulder. I spun around, nothing, just the stillness of my apartment. When I looked back, the shadow was gone. My reflection stared ordinary as ever, as though it hadn't just revealed something I wasn't meant to see. I tried to sleep with my back to the wall that night, but the mirror caught the glow of the street lamp outside, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my reflection was awake even when I wasn't.
That night, I decided to stop pretending I wasn't unnerved. I dragged the mirror farther from the bedroom and leaned it against the wall opposite the hallway, where I could pass it without having to confront it head-on. For insurance, I taped a thin strip of blue painter's tape along the frame, a ridiculous gesture, as if the mirror were a cupboard I didn't want curious fingers to open. I brushed my teeth with the bathroom door wide, letting steam creep down the hall. When I stepped out, the glass had fogged over just enough to turn my reflection into a soft shape. I raised my hand to wave at the ghost of myself. The fog shifted. A line appeared, not written by me, a single diagonal stroke that could have been a trick of condensation or the beginning of a letter. I stood, toothbrush dangling from my mouth, willing the line to resolve into nothing. It didn't. A second stroke crossed the first. A third curved below them. It wasn't a word. It was a small, careful I. And it blinked. The brush clattered into the sink. When I looked back, the fog had already thinned. Innocence restored. The glass showed what was there. Me, pale and foolish, with toothpaste on my chin. I slept with the hall light on. Morning made me braver. I told myself it was sleep deprivation, plus too many strange thoughts. I made coffee and decided to test the thing like it was a faulty appliance. I stood squared to the glass and lifted my left hand. The reflection obeyed. I lifted my right. It followed. I turned my head quickly left, then right. The reflection lagged by a breath, enough to be wrong, not enough to be provable. So I set rules. I stuck a Post-it on the wall by the mirror with a list that would have made a scientist proud. 1. Raise left hand. 2. Touch cheek. 3. Step back. 4. Smile. I repeated the sequence, eyes narrowed, trying to catch the glass in its lie. On smile, my mouth stayed flat. In the mirror, mine softened anyway, the tiniest curve tugging at a face I didn't feel. "Stop it," I said aloud. The reflection's smile faded, not because I told it to. It faded like someone else had changed their mind. At work, the day tugged me along by practical threads. Emails, a budget spreadsheet, a meeting where we pretended deadlines meant comfort. But each time I glimpsed my face in a dark monitor or a bathroom fixture, I flinched, half expecting the glass to anticipate me. It didn't. ordinary reflections everywhere, bland and obedient. It was only my mirror that misbehaved. Back home, I tried moving it again, angling it so it faced the window instead of me. The room felt immediately larger, calmer. I turned away to heat soup and heard a soft scrape. When I looked back, the mirror had not moved, exactly, but its angle had shifted a degree, enough to take me in at the edge of its sight. My skin prickled with the sensation of being politely watched. I decided on one more test. I set my Metronica app on the dresser and tapped it to a slow, patient tick. I faced the glass and began to move in time. Tick, raise hand, tick, lower, tick, tilt head, tick, blink. The reflection matched, then drifted, then overtook me. On one beat, her eyes closed before mine did, a fraction of a second in the future. I swore and lost the rhythm entirely. "What do you want?" I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. The room answered only with the Metronica's steady insistence. I reached out, palm flat, to touch the glass. It was colder than a window in winter. Cold with depth, the kind of cold that lives in old wells. For a second, the surface pushed back. Not hard, just enough to tell me that the glass had its own skin. I left my hand there until the chill numbed my fingertips. Then I leaned closer. My reflection leaned too, but not perfectly. A strand of hair fell over her forehead a moment before it fell over mine. Behind her, where my hallway should have been, I saw wallpaper I did not own, pale lemons on white, a pattern so specific my lungs forgot air. My grandmother's kitchen had been papered in lemons. I could smell it in memory. Heat, sugar, the shine of jam jars lined to cool. In the glass, the lemons were faded with sun, the way they'd looked when I was 10. My reflection stood in front of that wall, not my wall, and for a heartbeat I saw a small notch on her wrist, a crescent scar I'd gotten the summer I reached for a pot too soon. The skin on my wrist was smooth. "Lie," I whispered, but I wasn't sure whether I meant the missing scar or the returned wallpaper, or the way the mirror pretended it had no opinions. The lemons dissolved back into my hallway as if a curtain had been drawn between seasons. I stumbled back and knocked into the dresser. The Metronica fell silent. I covered the mirror with a sheet. It was the oldest trick in every story, as if cloth could calm what glass could not. The fabric hung like an exhausted ghost, and the apartment exhaled. I felt foolish and relieved at once. An hour later, passing by with a plate in my hand, I saw the sheet's corner lift. Not drift, lift, as though invisible fingers had pinched it. It fluttered, then settled. Beneath it, the mirror breathed. I tugged the sheet off, angry enough to forget to be afraid. I said, "If you're going to lie, do it with purpose." The room seemed to listen. The mirror did nothing at all. That night, I dreamed in glass. I moved through rooms that were not mine, a kitchen with lemon wallpaper, a stairwell that smelled like damp wood, a narrow bedroom where a wind chime sang without wind. In each, I saw myself from across the room doing the ordinary things a life requires, tying shoes, rinsing cups, smoothing a bedspread. Each version of me glanced up at an invisible watcher and smiled a small private smile as if to say, "Yes, I know you're there. I know you're watching. Keep watching until you see it." When I woke, the mirror stood where I'd left it, bare and quiet. But the part of me that catalogs details had already noticed. The blue painter's tape I'd stuck along the frame was gone. In its place, a faint, clean line ran through the dust, the shape of an eye, small and careful, exactly where the fog had drawn it the night before. It wasn't threatening, it was patient. And patience, I realized, can be more dangerous than malice when it wants to teach you something you don't want to know.
I kept the mirror covered for 2 full days. A sheet draped across its frame, turning it into nothing more than a lump of fabric in the corner. The apartment felt later that way, like I'd shut a window against a storm. Still, I caught myself glancing at it, half expecting the cloth to twitch on its own. On the third morning, curiosity won. I peeled the sheet back, telling myself I'd face whatever game the glass wanted to play. The surface shone innocently, reflecting my room with irritating accuracy. The unmade bed, a cup abandoned on the dresser, sunlight slicing in through blinds. Nothing unusual. I stood there longer than I meant to, waiting. When nothing happened, relief and disappointment tangled inside me. Then, just as I turned away, the air shifted. A draft, though no window was open. When I looked back, the mirror had changed. Behind my reflection was a kitchen that wasn't mine. Lemon wallpaper faded and peeling at the corners. The smell of sugar drifted faintly, impossible, yet vivid, carrying me back years. My grandmother's kitchen. I froze. She had died when I was 16, and that house had been sold long ago. Yet here it was, blooming in silver and glass, whole and undeniable. My reflection didn't match me anymore. It was younger, maybe 10 years old. I watched myself perch on a chair too tall for my legs, swinging my feet as my grandmother placed a jar of jam before me. I remembered that summer, the scar on my wrist from touching a hot pot too soon. In the mirror, the girl smiled shyly, tracing the scar that wasn't on my present skin anymore. My throat closed. I reached out, fingertips trembling against the cold glass. The girl looked up, as if she felt me watching. Her smile widened, not innocent, but knowing. "Stop," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was speaking to, the mirror, the child, or the part of myself that still ached for that kitchen. The scene dissolved, the lemons fading, the girl flickering away until only my own reflection stared back. Older, tired, pale. I backed away, heart racing. This wasn't a glitch anymore. This was memory, resurrected. That night, I dreamed of the house again. The mirror stood in the hallway where no mirror had ever been, showing room after room of moments I'd tucked away. Arguments with my parents, nights I cried quietly into my pillow, the first boy who broke my heart. The glass wasn't reflecting, it was replaying, resurrecting ghosts I hadn't asked to see. When I woke, the sheet was back over the mirror, though I hadn't replaced it. My hands shook as I pulled it free. This time, the reflection was darker. Not just dim light, truly darker, as if shadows had soaked into the silver itself. I leaned close and saw my grandmother again. Not alive, not moving. Just her empty chair in that lemon kitchen, sunlight falling across it, dust swirling in a silence that felt absolute. I staggered back. The mirror was showing me not only what was gone, but what I refused to linger on. The chair, the absence, the truth I always avoided. That memory is not only about what we keep, but what we lose. I wanted to smash it then, to shatter the frame and scatter the lies across the floor. But my hand wouldn't lift. Something in me knew it wasn't lying. Not really. It was only telling the truth in a way I had never dared to face. I sat on the edge of my bed until the light outside dimmed, until my apartment slipped into evening. The mirror remained quiet, reflecting only what was there. Yet every time I blinked, I thought I saw the faint shimmer of lemons, the shadow of a girl's swinging feet, the empty chair. It was no longer just a mirror. It was a memory box I hadn't consented to open.
By the next evening, I'd stopped pretending the mirror could be ignored. I came home from work, dropped my bag by the door, and found myself standing in front of it before I'd even taken off my shoes. The glass reflected only the dimness of my apartment, but I could feel it waiting, like someone holding their breath on the other side. I told myself not to touch it. I told myself to walk away. Instead, I reached out, palm against the cool surface, and whispered, "Show me." The shift was immediate. My reflection blinked, but slower than me, as though caught in another rhythm. The background melted, my apartment dissolved, replaced by the locker-lined hall of my old high school. My stomach turned. I hadn't set foot there in years, and I hadn't wanted to. The smell of floor wax and adolescent perfume hit me, sharp and suffocating. The mirror's version of me was 16, slouched against the locker, arms folded tight across her chest. And then I saw him. Ethan, my first boyfriend, my first heartbreak. The boy who had promised to call and never did, who had laughed with friends at something I said, who had made me feel invisible with a single shrug. In the glass, I watched myself trying not to cry as he walked past me, arm draped around another girl's shoulders. My hands curled into fists. I wanted to pound the mirror to stop it from dragging me back into that humiliation, but I couldn't look away. 16-year-old me lifted her chin, smiled too brightly, pretended it didn't hurt. And older me, standing in my dim apartment, felt the old ache bloom fresh. "Enough," I muttered. The glass shivered, but it wasn't finished. The scene shifted again. College now. A tiny dorm room, posters peeling from the walls, stacks of books toppling, and me, 20 years old, sitting at a desk with my head in my hands. On the bed behind me, a suitcase stood half-packed. I remembered that night too well. The night I almost left, almost gave up on everything I thought I wanted. I had been so close to calling my parents, telling them I was done, begging for a way home, but I hadn't. I had swallowed the panic, zipped the suitcase shut, and forced myself to stay. The mirror showed me sitting there, trembling, my breath shallow. Then it showed me standing, walking to the suitcase, opening it again, but instead of clothes, it was filled with scraps of paper. Each one bore a word: doubt, fear, failure, not enough. The younger me stared at the words, tears streaming down her face, then looked up directly at me through the glass. I stumbled back, heart hammering. She was looking at me, not at herself, not at some ghost, but at me now. Her mouth moved, no sound came, but I could read it. Help me. I clutched the edge of the dresser, my knees weak. I said, I can't. You're gone. That moment's gone. But the mirror didn't agree. The words in the suitcase began to blur, ink bleeding until the slips dissolved into black water. The younger me's hands dipped into it, and when she lifted them again, they were empty. She smiled, not with relief, but with something heavier, sadder. Then the scene blinked out, leaving only my own pale reflection staring back at me. I sank onto the bed, my pulse pounding in my ears. The mirror wasn't showing lies. It was showing truths I'd buried, corners of myself I had sealed away. And worse, it wasn't just memory anymore. It was interaction. The younger me had seen me, had asked me for something. The thought was unbearable and irresistible. I dragged the sheet over the mirror again, hands shaking. But as I stepped back, the fabric shifted, rippling as though something inside had exhaled. I whispered, "What do you want from me?" The sheet stilled. My apartment went quiet. But in the silence, I knew the mirror wasn't finished, not by far. By the next morning, I had made up my mind. The mirror had to go. I didn't even give myself time to hesitate. I threw on jeans and an old sweater, grabbed the edges of the heavy frame, and dragged it across the floor. The wood groaned against the boards, leaving pale scars in its wake. I didn't care. I only wanted it gone. Downstairs, I propped it against the wall by the dumpster. For a moment, I just stared at it, chest heaving. The glass reflected the cracked pavement, the smudged sky. Nothing sinister, nothing strange. "Stay here," I muttered, ridiculous as it sounded. "Stay gone." I turned and walked away. But when I came back that evening, arms loaded with groceries, my heart plummeted. The mirror stood in my apartment, not near the door where I'd left it, not leaning awkwardly where I dragged it before. No, it was back in my bedroom, propped neatly against the same wall as if it had never moved. I dropped the bags. Apples rolled across the floor. My breath came shallow, a cold sweat breaking down my spine. I approached slowly, afraid to blink. The glass was calm, reflecting only my wide eyes, my shaking hands. But I noticed the frame. A new scratch marred its edge, fresh and raw. Proof that I hadn't imagined dragging it through the hallway. Proof of its journey back. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no!" I tried again the next day. This time I borrowed a friend's car. I wedged the mirror into the back seat, ignoring the way it seemed to resist every angle. I drove 20 minutes out of the city, into the sprawl of industrial lots and forgotten warehouses. I leaned it against a graffiti-covered wall and left it there, forcing myself not to look back. That night, I locked every door, closed every curtain. Sleep came heavy, desperate. When I woke, the mirror was in the hallway. She draped politely over it, waiting. I screamed then, a raw, jagged sound that startled even me. I ripped the sheet off and slammed my fists against the glass. My reflection flinched a fraction too late, as though mocking me with its delayed obedience. "What do you want?" I shouted. My voice cracked. "Why me?" The mirror didn't answer, but as I leaned close, breathing hard, I saw something behind my reflection. Not the lemon wallpaper this time, not my grandmother's chair. It was my own bedroom. But wrong. Too neat. The bed made perfectly, the dresser free of clutter, the air gleaming with a light my real apartment never carried. And in that perfect room, my reflection smiled again. I stumbled back, heart hammering. I realized then that the mirror hadn't followed me home. It had never left. Wherever I put it, it would remain. Because it wasn't inside my apartment. It was inside me. For 3 nights in a row, I avoided the mirror as best I could. I draped it in cloth, I turned it to face the wall, I even rearranged furniture to block its view. But it didn't matter. Every time I passed the corner where it stood, I felt the air tighten, like stepping into a room where someone had just stopped speaking. On the 4th night, I woke at 3 a.m. The apartment was silent, except for the low hum of the fridge. I sat up slowly, my throat dry, and realized why I was awake. The faint scrape of something heavy moving across wood. My heart pounded. I turned my head toward the sound. The mirror. It had shifted. The frame no longer leaned where I'd left it. It stood perfectly upright, balanced as though an unseen hand had steadied it. And the sheet I'd tucked carefully over it lay pooled on the floor. I held my breath. My reflection stared back from the dark glass. But she wasn't lying in bed like me. She was standing. My reflection's head tilted slowly, eyes bright with an awareness that turned my stomach cold. She raised her hand, not a mirror of mine, which clutched the blanket tight, but her own deliberate gesture. She waved. "No, you don't get to do that." She smiled. It was this same smile I'd seen before, the one that bloomed when I wasn't smiling. Only now it spread wider, bolder, until it felt like a mask stretched too far. I forced myself to move. I threw the blanket aside and walked toward it, barefoot on the cold floor. With every step, the reflection seemed to lean closer, eager. "You're not me," I said when I stood before it. My voice trembled, but the words steadied me. Her lips moved in reply. At first, no sound reached me. Then, faintly, like a voice carried through water, "I'm what you leave behind." My chest seized. What does that mean? But she didn't answer. Instead, she stepped back. And as she moved, the room in the glass changed. Not my bedroom anymore, not my hallway. A narrow corridor appeared, lined with doors I didn't recognize, stretching into darkness. My reflection waited at its threshold, hand still raised, inviting me. I stumbled back, pulse racing. My heel caught on the sheet on the floor, and I nearly fell. By the time I looked up again, the reflection was ordinary. Me, pale and shaking, standing in my own apartment. I dropped to my knees, clutching the fabric, and threw it over the frame, as if covering it could erase what I'd seen. But my mind replayed it over and over. The wave, the smile, the corridor beyond. That night, I slept on the couch, the mirror out of sight. Still, in my dreams, I walked that corridor. My reflection led the way, her steps silent, her head turning now and then to be sure I followed. When I woke, the sheet was gone again. The mirror stood bare, waiting, as though the night had been a rehearsal, and the real performance hadn't yet begun.
I tried to keep myself busy the next day, to drown out the memory of the reflection's wave. I scrubbed the kitchen, reorganized drawers that didn't need organizing, answered every message on my phone. But every quiet moment cracked open the same thought: the corridor. By evening, exhaustion won. I sat in front of the mirror, the sheet balled at my feet, and stared into the glass. My reflection copied me faithfully for once. Slim shoulders, tired eyes, lips pressed tight. The room behind her was my own, dull and safe. I almost laughed. Maybe it had all been a dream. Maybe I had been sleepwalking. Maybe stress had twisted the edges of my sight. Then the light flickered. Just once. Subtle. Like the bulb above me had sighed. And when it steadied, my reflection didn't. She was still slouched, still mirroring my position, but the room behind her had shifted. I leaned closer, breath fogging faintly on the glass. The corridor again. Narrow, endless, lined with doors. This time, though, I could see details. One door painted green, another scratched in bare wood, one half open with golden light spilling out. My reflection tilted her head, as though listening to a sound I couldn't hear. "Why are you showing me this?" I whispered. She blinked, and her lips moved. The words formed slowly, deliberately, but I could read them. "Choose one." I shook my head. "I can't." Her expression sharpened, the softness gone. She lifted her hand, pointed down the hall. My pulse quickened. I followed the gesture with my eyes, and though the corridor stretched into darkness, I thought I glimpsed something. A faint clicker like candlelight. Then my reflection leaned forward until her forehead nearly touched the glass. My own breath misted between us, and for a dizzy second I thought I could feel her breath too, cold against my skin. "I don't want this," I whispered. The corridor behind her rippled like water, and the green door swung open. Inside, I saw a flash of a room I hadn't thought about in the years. My childhood bedroom. Posters on the walls, stacks of books by the bed, the half-finished drawing I'd hidden under the mattress because I thought it was terrible. I gasped. The mirror had dug deeper than memory. It had found embarrassment, shame, the small cuts I'd never shown anyone. The reflection smiled faintly. "Choose," her lips shaped again. My stomach twisted. "Not that one," I said, though no sound carried across. The green door shut with a thud I felt in my chest. The half-open door with the golden light swung wider. It revealed not pain, not embarrassment, but a moment I had nearly forgotten. Sitting in a cafe years ago, sketchbook open, sunlight pouring across the page as I laughed with a stranger who had asked to see my drawings. His face was blurred in memory, but I remembered the feeling, pure, unguarded joy. My reflection met my gaze. She didn't mouth words this time. She didn't need to. The golden room glowed brighter, warm, and insistent, as though urging me forward. For the first time, I reached out willingly. My fingertips brushed the glass, and for an instant, warmth bloomed in my palm, not cold. The reflection nodded, once, approving. Then everything blinked out. My apartment returned, bland and dim, only my pale reflection staring back. I sank onto the bed, shaking, but my chest felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, clearer. The mirror hadn't lied tonight. It had reminded me of something I had lost, the proof that joy existed, even in the shadows. And that terrified me more than the lies ever had.
The next night, I didn't bother with the sheet. Covering the mirror only postponed the inevitable, like shutting your eyes and pretending the dark wasn't still there when you opened them again. I sat cross-legged on the floor, facing it. No tests, no games, no desperate attempts to catch it lying. Just me, the glass, and the steady hum of my own heartbeat. At first, it showed me as it always did, tired, cautious, wary of my own shadow. The apartment behind me was unchanged. A book left open on the table, the cup I hadn't washed, the restless glow of the street lamp spilling across the blinds. I exhaled. "All right," I whispered. "No tricks, no hiding. Show me what I don't want to see." The change came slow this time, like fog rolling across a field. My reflection wavered, shimmered, and then the background slipped away. The corridor again. Endless, doors sealed tight in both directions. But instead of waiting at its entrance, my reflection was already halfway down, standing before one of the closed doors. It was black. Not wood, not paint. Black like an absence, a void cut into shape. My stomach nodded. I didn't want to know what waited behind it, yet my reflection reached for the handle, turning it slowly, daring me to watch. The door opened. At first, I saw nothing, just darkness, thick and endless. But as my eyes adjusted, shapes began to emerge. A desk, papers scattered across it, my own handwriting crawling across page after page, the ink smeared from tears I hadn't admitted to crying. The words were raw, jagged, cruel, things I had written to myself on nights when loneliness clawed at me. "You'll never be enough. You're always failing. You'll never find love." I shook my head violently. "No, not that. I don't want to see that." My reflection didn't waver. She stared at me, eyes unblinking, as if to say, "You wrote this. It belongs to you." The pages lifted in a sudden rush, spinning upward like startled birds. They pressed against the glass, fluttering, piling, until I could see the sentences clear enough to read them out loud. "I hated you," I whispered, throat closing. "I hated myself." Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't look away. For once, I didn't turn from the words, the weight, the bruises I'd left on my own heart. I let them sting. I let them settle. Slowly, the pages burned away, not with fire, but with light. Each word dissolved into sparks until the black door stood empty again. My reflection stepped forward, closer to me.
Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't cruel either. More like recognition. The corridor faded. My apartment returned. But the mirror still hummed, vibrating faintly against the air as though it had carved a truth into me that wouldn't wash away. I wiped my face and laughed softly, the sound fragile but real. You're not lying anymore. You're finally telling me the truth. For the first time, the mirror seemed content. My reflection moved with me perfectly. No delays, no distortions. Just me and the knowledge of what I had seen.
I woke the next morning with swollen eyes and a heaviness in my chest, but it wasn't the same kind of heaviness as before. This weight felt honest, like a bruise that had finally been pressed and acknowledged instead of ignored. I made tea, set the cup beside me, and sat in front of the mirror again. For once, the glass didn't rush to change. It simply reflected. My messy hair, my blotchy skin, the curve of steam rising from the mug. Just me. "Is that it?" I asked aloud. "Is this what you wanted? To force me to see what I've been hiding?" The silence stretched. Then the light shifted, faint and golden, as though the sun had risen inside the room. My reflection softened. Behind her, the corridor appeared again, but the black door was gone. In its place stood the half-open one I'd glimpsed before, spilling out warm light. I leaned forward. The glow deepened, filling the edges of the mirror, wrapping around my reflection until it looked less like an image and more like a window. She turned her head slightly, beckoning me. This time I didn't resist. The door creaked wider, revealing the cafe from my memory. The one with the sketchbook, the sunlight, the stranger who had asked to see what I had drawn. For years, I had dismissed that day, convincing myself it didn't matter, that the laughter I shared then was a small, forgettable thing. But in the mirror, the scene was alive again. Colors bright, voices warm, my younger self radiant with joy. She drew, unguarded, hands smudged with pencil. When the stranger leaned in and said something, words blurred by time, she threw her head back and laughed, a sound so free it startled me. I touched the glass, aching. The reflection glanced at me, eyes shining. Her lips moved. "This is you too." Tears stung my eyes, but not from pain this time, from longing, from relief. I whispered, "I remember." The light swelled until it filled everything, dissolving the cafe, the stranger, even my younger self. When it faded, I was left staring at my own face again. But something in it was different. The set of my jaw, the curve at the corners of my lips. I looked softer, more whole. I sat back, breath shaking. The mirror wasn't only about torment or lies or the ghosts of old hurts. It was also about reminding me of the parts I'd buried because I was afraid they weren't real. The joy, the laughter, the proof that I had been more than my wounds. I closed my eyes and inhaled. When I opened them, the mirror was quiet again. Just wood and glass, just me. And for the first time since I'd brought it home, I didn't feel afraid of it. I felt grateful. I didn't cover it that night. I left it bare, letting the street lamp's glow spill across its surface. When I passed it on my way to bed, my reflection smiled at me. Not ahead of me, not behind me, at the same time, perfectly in sync. I smiled back. Hours later, sleep tangled me in dreams. But they weren't the frantic nightmares of corridors and black doors. They were gentle, I was walking through sunlit streets, sketchbook in hand, and strangers stopped to look, not to judge, but to marvel. I felt the warmth of belonging, the possibility of being seen without shame. When I woke before dawn, I sat on the edge of the bed and glanced at the mirror. It was still there, faithful, waiting. My reflection blinked with me, exhaled with me. No distortions, just a quiet echo. For the first time, I touched the frame without fear. The wood was smooth, worn from years of other hands. I wondered how many people it had shown themselves to before me. How many had looked, recoiled, then returned again, as I had. The thought no longer frightened me. It comforted me. The mirror wasn't cursed. It wasn't cruel. It was honest in its own way. A mirror that lied only enough to remind me that truth had more than one face.
The days that followed felt different. Not lighter, exactly, but clearer, as though the fog that had sat over my life had finally begun to lift. I still went to work, still ran errands, still folded laundry and scrolled through endless messages, but each time I passed the mirror, I no longer flinched. Sometimes it showed only what was there, the clutter on my table, the messy knot of my hair, the weary curve of my shoulders. Sometimes, though, it shifted. A flash of my grandmother's kitchen, the laughter of my younger self sketching at the cafe, the silent plea of a girl sitting by her suitcase. Each time, the vision stayed only a moment before dissolving, like waves lapping at a shore. They didn't demand, they reminded. I began to realize something. The mirror had never wanted to hurt me. It had wanted me to see myself whole, not just the polished surface I let others glimpse, but the fractures, the bruises, the moments of light I dismissed as trivial. One night, after a long day that left me frayed, I sat cross-legged before the mirror again. My reflection stared back, calm, steady. I whispered, "Thank you." The glass rippled faintly, and for the first time, I swore I heard a sound. Not words, not even a voice, just a hum, low and resonant, like the vibration of strings in a distant instrument. It filled the room, filled me, and then faded. I touched the glass one last time. I'm not afraid anymore. My reflections smiled with me, perfectly in sync. No lag, no distortion, and in that simple harmony, I understood the lesson. The lies had never been lies at all. They had been truths dressed differently, truths I wasn't ready to face until now. The mirror didn't need to be covered again. It didn't need to be moved or banished. It was part of my apartment, part of my story, part of me. When I turned away, I caught a glimpse in the corner of my eye, not of my own room, but of the corridor once more. This time, every door stood open, golden light spilling out in cascades. No darkness, no black voids, just possibility. I smiled and let it fade, carrying the warmth of that vision with me into bed. For the first time in months, I slept without fear of what the night might bring. And when morning came, the mirror waited as always. Silent, patient, honest. Not an enemy, not a curse, a keeper of the truths I had finally dared to see. Because sometimes a mirror has to lie, just enough to teach you what the truth has always been.